Good afternoon. My name is Zbaszyn, and I'm the manager of academic programs and outreach at the JDC Archives. I'm delighted to welcome you to this public lecture sponsored by the JDC Archives in the context of the Max and Cecil Stower JDC Archives Fellowship Program. I want to extend our thanks to Saul Chessin, who is with us today in endowing those 4 fellowships. The goal of the Max and Cecil Stower JDC Archives Fellowship is to enable scholars engaged in graduate level, postdoctoral, or independent research to conduct research in the JDC Archives. The JDC Archives, which houses the records of JDC since its creation almost 105 years ago, is one of the most important repositories in the world for the study of modern Jewish history. Visiting scholars from around the world utilize our unique offerings for their research, as do publishers, journalists, family researchers, curators, filmmakers, and others. Our speaker today, Dr. Alina Bothe, is the recipient of the Max and Cecil Stower JDC Archives Fellowship for 2018. Alina received her PhD in history from Freie Universität Berlin. She was a research fellow for the Center for Jewish Studies Berlin-Brandenburg and has taught at the Freie Universität Berlin, the Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin, as well as the IES Abroad Berlin. In 2016, she was awarded the USC Shoah Foundation Teaching Fellowship for a class where students, under her guidance, researched the biographies of families expelled from Berlin as Polish Jews in 1938. She is the curator of an exhibition on the expulsion of Polish Jews from Berlin, which was shown at the Centrum Judaicum in Berlin from July 2018 to February 2019. This exhibition will be shown in Warsaw at the Jewish Historical Institute from September to November 2019. She has received numerous awards and fellowships, including the postdoctoral fellowship from the Fondation pour la Mémoire de la Shoah in 2016-2018. She is the author of Die Geschichte der Shoah im virtuellen Raum, eine Quellenkritik, which was published in Berlin in 2018. Her most currently, she edited Ausgewiesen, Berlin, 28. Oktober 1938, Die Geschichte der politischen Aktion. I'm sorry for my German. Other publications include gender history and conceptual history. She is conducting research in the JDC Archives for a book on the persecution of Jews with Polish citizenship in the German Reich between 1938 and 1940. She received the Saul Kogan Fellowship from the Claims Conference to enable her to write this book. We have in the audience today a number of people who themselves or their families were expelled from Germany as they were Polish citizens, so we want to extend a particular warm welcome to them. Alina Bothe will now deliver a lecture. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Thank you, first of all, Isabel, for this wonderful introduction and the very warm reception that I received here at the JDC Archives, which enabled me in the last few days to find very valuable materials for my book, for my research. It's been an incredible experience being here, and I'm really convinced that my pronunciation in French would have been much worse. So I congratulate you on your German pronunciation. It was really, really good. I am honored that families of those who have been through what I'll be talking about in a moment are with us today. And I'm also grateful that colleagues are attending. All of you are very warm welcome this afternoon. And now I'll go into what I'll be talking about today. What we see here are refugees, thousands of them, on the courtyard of the train station of Zbaszyn, a small Polish border town, on October 29, 1938. I will speak about how they came there, why they've been deported there, and what happens to them. And I will place special emphasis on the Jewish response to this humanitarian catastrophe that unfolded within hours along the Polish-German border. Those that you can see on this picture are just a few of those who've been fallen victim on this last cold and wet October weekend of 1938 to a unique persecution, a singling out of Jews with Polish passports in the German Reich, deporting them over the border towards Poland. This has been the start of a more than 4-year-long and ongoing unique and specific persecution of Jews with Polish citizenship in the Reich. I will today only focus on the first few months of what has been happening until the German invasion to Poland. So that you have a short introduction into where we are talking to. Zbaszyn is just right there, marked in red, close to Poznan, close to Berlin. Actually, it's 2 hours drive from Berlin on the Polish-German border. It's a very small town, not as large as it may be indicated on this map. And it's to Zbaszyn that about half of the 18,000 people who were expelled on that weekend were sent off. The others were sent off either to Koinice, which is up north in between Schneiderbühl and Bydgoszcz, or they were sent south around the area of Katowice and Bothe. It is there in the area of Katowice that around 6,000 have to cross the border, mainly coming from Saxony and Bavaria. And it's at Koinice that about 1,500 to 2,000 have to cross the border, and the major bulk of people, 8,500, are forced to cross at Zbaszyn. They're deported there in special trains, Sonderzüge, which are provided by the German railways. It's the first time, actually, that the German railways, on the request of the Gestapo, provides special trains for deportation. Zbaszyn is a very small town. Even today, it has, just like in 1938, round about 5,000 inhabitants. It is a small border town which has a peculiar big train station in relation to this border town or to the town itself. This is because it is the first town on the Polish side, on the Polish border, after the emergence of the Second Polish Republic in 1918 to greet foreign dignitaries on their way over to Warsaw. And this has been a special place for the refugees, as most of them came into the town through this place. What you can see here is this is the town of Zbaszyn. This is the railway going up to Warsaw, and around here is the German-Polish border. And in between this area, where the German-Polish border was to Zbaszyn, people were forced to walk during the night. They were forced at gunpoint to cross over into Poland. I'll come to what's happening in this night in a moment again, but I would first like to tell you what happened beforehand. How did it came to such a point? How did it came to this events of the last October weekend of 1938? And doing so, I would like to start with January 5th, 1938, and not with the Polish Jews, but actually with an expulsion order that is decreed by Werner Best, who is pictured here in the middle of the main perpetrators of this action. He's at that point working at the Ministry of Interior in Germany, and he issues a decree to all police stations in Germany to deport within a time frame of 6 to 8 weeks all Jews with Soviet citizenship. At least 500 of them received the deportation order. Most of these deportations actually fail because the Soviet Union does not issue entry visas. But, and this is why I'm telling you this story, it shows that the idea of forcibly removing, of deporting Jews with Eastern European heritage and Eastern European passports from Germany towards Eastern Europe has been around in the Ministry of Interior in Germany before what is happening in March 1938 in Poland. In March 1938 in Poland, about 3 months after Germany for the first time tries to expel Jews with Eastern European passports, the Polish Sejm and Senate within less than 2 weeks pass a new citizenship law. This citizenship law comes in response to the German annexation of Austria and the, let's call it, fear on the Polish side that there might be a wave of impoverished migrants coming back from Austria to Poland with Jewish heritage. So the Polish Sejm and Senate decide that it should be possible to revoke the citizenship of people who have been living longer abroad than 5 years permanently. And this is targeted, not de jure, but de facto only against Jews with Polish papers. In Germany at this point, there are living about 55,000 Jews with Polish citizenship and Polish passports. And it is just about a fortnight later, on the 8th of April, and the time span here is so important. It's the 8th of April that Werner Best convenes a meeting at the Ministry of Interior of members, high-ranking officials of the Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including Reinhard Heydrich, who is directly working for Himmler at that point, and Ernst von Weizsäcker, who is the Undersecretary of State under Ribbentrop and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So this is taking place on very elite levels of the German administration. And in this meeting, the German response towards the Polish march laws is discussed. To put it bluntly, Poland is handing an option on a silver plate towards these German officials who are thinking about expulsions for months before. So what they do is immediately figure out their response, and among these responses is all over the Reich to convene lists of Jews with Polish citizenship, which are sometimes known, sometimes not known. And in preparation of a large deportation measure, you need to know who you would like to deport and who is there. So preparing the list is actually very important, and it's the first time that the Jewish communities and the institutions are forced to hand over information on singled out Jewish groups on a large scale. Also, and this is important, the regulation on foreigners for the police is changed. The regulation on foreigners that is valid up to this point comes from the year of 1932 and is under liberal Prussian law. And this old foreign police regulation states that it is no reason that someone loses his residence permit once he loses the citizenship of another country. This is turned opposite in the new regulation of August 22nd, 1938. From then on, the German regulation says once a foreigner loses the citizenship of his country, he immediately loses the residence permit in Germany. So the loss of citizenship abroad equals the loss of residence permit in Germany. Again, this is months before the deportation. So it's a long-term preparation that has taken place. It's not a spontaneous action. On October 6, finally, the Polish Minister of Interior puts into action or into effect this law of March 1938 with a date of the 30th of October already, meaning that someone with a Polish passport living abroad permanently for more than 5 years had the time until the 30th of October to receive a certain stamp in his or her passport, allowing them to return to Poland. Otherwise, if this stamp was not granted at a consulate or at a border post, it would mean that this person loses a valid passport, and with the valid passport, the citizenship. This law is published only by the 15th of October, and you can see by this that it is not intended that people actually get this stamp in time. And it is on that point that Werner Best implements a plan that has been drawn up months before. And in an express letter to all police stations all over the country on October 26, he then orders the implementation of the expulsion, starting in the west of the Reich on the 27th, arresting all Jews with Polish citizenship. What happens then is that all of the Reich, at least 25,000 people were arrested. They were taken from their homes, from their shops, from schools, from the streets actually. They were brought to collection points. They were transported mostly by train to the border, and very German, this is a kind of bureaucratic measure, they were handed out these expulsion orders. And these expulsion orders, as I show here, one for Moises Kalkstein, who and his wife and his children were deported from Berlin, issued that people had 24 hours to leave the Reich, and they were not allowed to return, but they were allowed to complain within 14 days after receiving this expulsion order. Only about half of the people who were living in the country who were to be deported were actually seized in this action. Some evaded the expulsions, some were warned, some heard rumors, some knew the new political situation, the new juridical situation in Poland, and made their minds up not to be available for police and to turn underground for a few days. But most were caught, whether were caught. For the victims, October 27th and 28th, the days of arrest in Germany, often meant the long-term separation of families. So, for example, when asked about the meaning of the deportation of October 28, 1938, Julius Book, a survivor from Berlin, stated very clearly, "This was the last time I saw my mother." He was nearly 16 when he was taken. He stayed with his father in a refugee camp in Krakow for more than a few months, and then he obtained one of the very few spaces in a Kindertransport directly from Poland over to the UK. And while he was going over to the UK, his parents fled to France, where eventually his mother was arrested in 1942 and sent over to Auschwitz. So he never saw her again. And this is not a single story, but it sums up the experiences of many who were arrested and caught in this very first action. For the perpetrators, The Polenaktion, as it is called by the perpetrators in German, the Polish action, is important in their internal learning and radicalization process. It is there, for example, that for the first time the Reichsbahn is ordered to send special trains, Sonderzüge, but it is also in this deportation that those who are deported still have their apartments, they still own shops, they are economically and socially embedded in the surrounding society. This causes actually a lot of bureaucratic problems in the upcoming months for the German administration. And of course, perpetrators do learn something at such a moment. In the later deportations, from 41 starting, those who are deported are strained of their social and economic relations. They are no longer having any economic exchange with the non-Jewish surroundings. Oftentimes they are not staying in their own apartments. Also, of course, the perpetrators are learning here how to transport a large group of people at once towards the border in an organized measure. And I think this is a very important point. They encounter no resistance, and they encounter no complaints out of the non-Jewish German population. Not even that, they are oftentimes applauded for what is happening. And what is happening is actually extremely public, as we can see in those photos. It shows the deportations in the small town of Rendsburg in the up north, as well as in Nuremberg down south. It shows people standing on the streets, waiting to be taken away towards the train stations, and you can see bystanders and spectators in these photos. And to me, what is really important is this is, as we also know from many other reports of the time, a very visible, a highly known action. Also, the German Red Cross was involved in this action. Its volunteers actually assisting in the arrests, especially in the small towns, as well as helping the police with the transport of the deportees. Meanwhile, the German Jewish communities rushed to help with the little means they had under the pressure of more than 5 years of the Nazi regime. They supplied food and drinks at the train stations, they helped out with cash, and they were taking charge of shops and apartments, transporting messages between family members. So they were really involved, and especially at train stations where more and more trains passed. For example, like Wrocław, Breslau, or Berlin, where a lot of people came through, where a lot of trains came through. It was the Jewish communities of these towns who supported those who had to pass along. Even though it is then just 2 weeks towards Kristallnacht, it is, I think, very fascinating and impressive that many of these Jewish communities stayed in touch with those who were deported once they were in Poland, sending them belongings, taking charge of the liquidation of businesses, of apartments, etc. And in many communities we can still find the exchange of letters on these matters. So it is really, I think, an ongoing support on the German Jewish side that was also not expected in that way by those who were sent off and is often remembered. Those who were sent off were brought by train over to the Polish border. Most of them were then forced to leave the trains, and this is where the intense violence of this action started, the physical violence. They were forced to march around 5 to 8 kilometers in the pouring rain during the night over fields and forests, and they were beaten on this way, many of them. And when about 6,000 arrived in Katowice, more than 200 needed immediate medical help, were sent over to hospitals. Warsaw reports more than 100 surgeries because of broken arms and legs. A lot of people heavily injured during the action, and we know that one person died already in Leipzig during the action, and 3 more in the night crossing over or in the coming hours then until the 29th in Poland. A very conservative estimation would be that at least 50 people die as a consequence of the deportation in the following weeks to come because of injuries or illnesses sustained during this weekend. On all other border towns, Katowice, Koinitz, etc., the refugees are relocated within 2 days towards the interior of Poland. This is unfortunately not possible in Zbaszyn, as the Polish government decides to close down the town and doesn't make not available for those who are in Zbaszyn at this moment to come over to the interior of Poland. They do so, and this is very clear from the internal Polish documents, because the refugees became a pledge for the Polish government in the international negotiations, especially on Jewish resettlement. When the JDC representative of Warsaw, Zbaszyn, arrived in Zbaszyn on the 2nd of November, after first helping out the situation in the south in Katowice, he describes in a report a few days later the feeling of deep desperation about the situation he found in Zbaszyn. People were literally lying on the streets, and he just didn't know what to do and where to start. And he described this in a very powerful, moving way. And then he says he was uplifted a few hours later because trucks were coming from the nearby Jewish community in Poznan, sending over food and clothes. And with this sign of help arriving, he was able to then start organizing what has become a large relief campaign that is basically being organized by the JDC. The local inhabitants, as Gittemans highlighted, did help with milk and shelter, especially for children, but also they were overwhelmed by the situation that unfolded in their town within 48 hours. So what happens is that a huge relief campaign in Poland and abroad starts. And within a very few hours, Jewish communities all over Poland receive telephone calls and radio messages that help is needed, especially in Warsaw, Kraków, and Zbaszyn, where the majority of refugees arrived. These appeals lead to thousands and thousands of zlotys being donated, as well as clothes, food, money, bedding, etc. being sent off to the places where it's needed. Also, the Jewish leaders in Warsaw, the Polish Jewish leaders, sent out telegrams to most international Jewish welfare organizations. And it's worth taking a moment to look at the relief infrastructure that, in the words of Max Weinreich, one of the founders of the YIVU, and at that point the European correspondent of the Jewish Daily Forward, was set up by joint, and he wrote actually in November, the Hilfskomitee was der Joint hat gegründet in Yiddish, so the help committee that the Joint founded, and this help committee, the central committee, was headed by Rabbi Professor Moses Shor, the head rabbi of Warsaw, and the organizational logistical setup came from Isaac Gitterman and his co-worker Emanuel Ringelblum. They had their headquarters in the Tłomacki 5, which is nowadays the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. And it is Emanuel Ringelblum in his obituary for his good friend Isaac Gittermann, who was murdered in the ghetto on the 18th of January 1943 in Warsaw. And Ringelblum writes this in the very last months of the ghetto, recollecting Gittermann's and his work in Zbaszyn, and I quote, "Gittermann worked 18 hours with his own office from Warsaw and the social workers from Poznan. He electrified the whole of Poland with his call for relief for the refugees." So what is then set up is a central committee, and to this central committee, which is located in Warsaw, 110 local committees all over Poland belong. And these local committees are accommodating those of the refugees who are not in Zbaszyn, but who are staying in these smaller towns aside from Warsaw and Krakow. They are a kind of, well, competitive as well as complementary organizations to it, like TOTS and ORT, so the welfare organizations of Polish Jewry, who in their institutional approach help out immediately, as well as the Bund in collaboration with the Polish Socialist Party, establishing its own ways and means of help. And at the bottom of this, I placed the JDC, as it was bringing in the first months the organizational skills, and then from February 1939 onwards the funds for what is happening in Zbaszyn. What was sort of a very immediate response and relief action, maybe taken 2, 3, 4 weeks, developed into a long-term relief campaign that continued until the late of August 1939. And just to make clear some of the tasks that the committees were facing and helping the refugees, I would like to put it into 3 phases. The immediate relief, the medical assistance, providing food and clothing and shelter for those who've been expelled, as well as registering the refugees, as it was not clear at this point who is actually into Poland, as well as hygiene measures, especially in Zbaszyn, to help prevent the spread of diseases. Then within the midterm efforts was the juridical advice, especially regarding the complaints against the expulsion measure, as well as the help with a short-term return that was allowed from February 1939 onwards, as well as the relocation of refugees all over Poland. And then when it was becoming clear that this is not going to be solved within a few weeks, long-term relief measures were necessary. And first of all, it was the question of either emigration or economic integration, as it was clear to those providing the assistance that this couldn't go on permanently, but that it would be necessary that most of the refugees become independent again. So the investment on the long-term side is into emigration and economic integration. Economic integration works perfectly fine in a city like Tarnów, where there is a Jewish textile industry that is able to absorb further workers, but it does not work in a small town like Rzeszów, where more and more people are dependent on welfare. Overall, conservatively estimated, at least 1,000 people permanently served on the committees for all these 110 committees over Poland, potentially many more. When we look into what the JDC did, I would like to point out, first of all, that it is an immediate response on the highest levels in Warsaw, Paris, and in New York. And first of all, in the first 3 months, it's not intense financial response. It's just about $40,000 in the first 3 months. Most comes at this point from inner Polish donations. But then when the funds in Poland expire in 1939, the joint steps in. And we have here a message from the Jewish Telegraphic Agency in August 1939 that lets us know that at this point the joint had already invested more than $1 million into the refugee help for those who've been deported from Germany in 1938. Zbaszyn was the place that actually became the symbol of this first mass deportation. Even though only a minority of the deportees who are becoming or who are seen as refugees in Poland arrived there and had to stay there. It is in Zbaszyn where a relief infrastructure had to be built up from the scratch, providing supplies, hospitals, workshops, etc. What is important here for me is that this was provided in the beginning, at least, in a certain spirit. And Emanuel Ringelblum points out this spirit in a letter he wrote already in 1938 after being on duty in Zbaszyn for more than 4 weeks. And he writes that the most important thing is that this is not a situation where some give and some receive. The refugees look on us as brothers who we have hurried to help them at a time of distress and tragedy. So it is not that he wants to see those who are working in Zbaszyn as helpers or care workers from above, but as equals and enablers of self-help in a mutual form of respect. And as I will show you in a moment, the sudden dependence was extremely stressful for those who were expelled and who, up to the 27th or 28th of October, had lived independent lives in Germany. Many well-to-do, proper middle classes owning businesses who then within days, having their life turn around 180 degrees, are becoming dependable on donations and the help of others, which comes to many of them as an extreme shock. First, a bit more about Zbaszyn. As I said, it's a very small town, so accommodation is the major problem in this moment. And it is first in open shelters, in a horse stable, as well as a mill and in former military barracks, that people find a place. And then more and more people can stay in private homes that are rented out. A family in a room at a house. Soup kitchens are installed outdoors, also a small prayer hall is erected. But the situation is extremely squeezed. I think to compare it to the subway in rush hour in New York wouldn't be too wrong to see how many people were there trying to get to the soup kitchens. For example, there are less than 10 soup kitchens for more than 5,000 people. So you have to imagine the situation of permanently waiting for the next thing to happen, queuing up, not knowing what's next. So this is extremely stressful psychologically, and it's extremely intense. Also, the refugee population in Zbaszyn is not stable, but it is permanently in flux. People are able to emigrate from Zbaszyn, others are able to go back to Germany from February 1939 onwards to liquidate their businesses and come back afterwards. And the deportations restart at the beginning of February, March 1939, so more and more people are coming. Also, relatives of those who've been taken in October 1938 are now being smuggled into the country or forced over the border. And you see here in the middle of the page a photo that is taken in Zbaszyn 39, and it shows a family that is at this moment reunited. It's the family Adler from Berlin. Father and the eldest brother had been taken in October. The mother and the two younger children are expulsed in March. And for them, Zbaszyn, which is the place of catastrophe, is also the space where they are reunited for the last time as a family before they are split up. Two of the biggest challenges over in Zbaszyn is productive help, emigration, and medical assistance. So the question is, what are the perspectives of those who are in Zbaszyn? And it's either emigration or economic integration, and therefore workshops and trainings in different trades are set up, as well as a makeshift hospital, which is, as you can see from the wallpaper in the background, in a regular house, and just a very makeshift hospital, but it is with 50 patients all the time at least. The other major effort in Zbaszyn is emigration, and it's through Zbaszyn that at least 1,200 people can emigrate towards the West. But even though what we've looked at is extremely impressive, it is also an extremely stressful time for most of them involved. And in April 1939, Abe Cahan, the editor of the Daily Jewish Forward here in New York, receives a letter from Elimelech Grunspan, who is since October in the refugee camp in Zbaszyn. Grunspan complains in quite harsh words, as you can see, about the severe mismanagement of the camp and the conduct of Polish Jewish employees of the committee towards the refugees. This letter is, by the Daily Forward, immediately forwarded to the JDC for comment, and the JDC takes it very seriously and goes into a large-scale examination of the matter. And the head of the Paris Joint Offices then writes to New York, I quote, "These complaints are the usual ones against any organization. It may be that the girls and other people sent to Zbaszyn to help in the work are not experienced in such work and may not have the tact to deal with the situation, but it is certainly not true that the people in Zbaszyn are maltreated." These conflicts are to me highly interesting, as the outburst of Elimelech Grunspan and others who wrote similar letters abroad show the emotional despair and the perception of the situation after it has become more or less permanent. This is not a letter complaining from the 2nd of November 1938, but this comes in a situation after more than 5 months. And it might be a response to what is actually happening in Zbaszyn, but potentially it's also a response to a situation where there is no perspective for a future that is opening up. Also, what we can see in these letters is that they unveil the view of the different Jewish groups, the Polish Jews in Poland, the German Jews with Polish passports as they are seen in Poland, as well as the American philanthropist Jews, to draw a very oversimplified picture, but still they are the main groups towards each other. And if I oversimplify again, we can say that the German Jews can't help themselves out from the Polish Jewish perspective. Meanwhile, the German Jews permanently state that the Polish Jews can't organize and manage, which is kind of a stereotype, but still it reflects, I think, a lot of the situation of how people came together and reacted towards each other. This letter here is actually not the only instance of conflict in late spring. In May, 800 refugees in Łódź enter a hunger strike directed against the local committee and the conditions. And it's then in Łódź that Tops steps in and takes over the care of the refugees. In June, hungry and destitute refugees in Warsaw occupy more than once the offices of the local and the central committee and actually staged protests directly under the office windows of Professor Shore. And the police is called more than once to remove the refugees from the offices where the Central Committee is working in the relief work. It is an enormous lack of funding in June, which is part of the uproar of the refugees, because of the enormous Jewish contributions to the Polish defense loan at this time. So many individual Polish Jewish families who have given towards the refugees can no longer do that from May, June onwards, as there's an enormous contribution towards the loan in preparation of the perceived upcoming war against Germany. So what we can see here is that what was sort of as an immediate short-term relief campaign became permanent, exhausting actually everyone involved and needing massive funding to keep going on. But then it is kind of back to start. As in June, Germany resumes large-scale expulsions, and a few more thousand refugees are thrown over the border. And this rekindles actually the flame of solidarity. So at the end of June, in which a new committee is founded, and the Yiddish newspaper Der Moment, which has been active all the time, starts a new donation campaign, focusing on the fate of refugee children, using photos, which is at this time still very, very rare in the Yiddish newspapers. And through this campaign, the readers learn the fate of different children. So the young toddler we see in the first picture on the left, actually from Berlin, contracted diphtheria in the camp of Zbaszyn, and then received a surgical tube to be able to breathe, and also in the Jewish hospital, and will from this point onwards not be able to speak. And then you see a photo of the 14-year-old Martin M., whose parents received the expulsion letter in Berlin early in June 1939, and he runs over to tell a friend that they are going to be leaving the country immediately, and on the way going there, he's run over by a car. Heavily injured, he'd broken both legs. Nonetheless, his parents are forced to take him with them the next day to Warsaw, where he then receives also care in the Jewish hospital. And the last photo is actually from the 30th of August 1939, and it shows double twins who are among the Plätchenkinder, the refugee children who are taken on the last direct kinder transport from Poland over to London. These kinder transports are organized by the Polish Jewish Refugee Fund, and through which at least 250 children who were deported from Germany can go over directly without crossing Germany from Gdynia on a motorboat to the UK. This rekindled flame of solidarity is financed by the JDC, but the work on the local level is offered by Polish Jewish volunteers. But it is in 1939, as I showed you beforehand, that the JDC starts to carry the burden of the financial aid that is necessary. Let me come to my conclusions. Meanwhile, the Nazi act of persecution was unprecedented. The large-scale relief action in Poland by Polish and international Jewry was so as well. Even though the relief campaign went through then more than one crisis. Actually, we could say it's a series of crises, one after the other, and its central agents were separated by different political and ethical approaches, by regional and local conditions. They tried and often succeeded to create a dignified environment for the refugees. It says a lot about this campaign that it continued after August 31st, 1939. The refugees were not abandoned even during the days in which war became imminent and after the German invasion. It has been due to this campaign and individual efforts that lives were saved in Poland, especially by immigration means. It is an impressive story of Jewish agency in the face of Nazi atrocity. And with this, I close and thank you very much for your attention.
We now have about 15 minutes for questions and answers.
I thought it was excellent. I could listen to you for hours, and your ability to go to all these archives with all the different languages and bring about the story and to tell what happened, and especially some of the implications, not in your conclusion, in terms of the final solution, using trains and what they learned about property and other things like that. The only question I have, and I'm afraid to ask, I'm afraid to say it, is you generalize sometimes about a positive Polish-Jewish response towards refugees coming from Germany. When I looked at the books on JDC by the Israeli scholar, the two books, one of the comments he makes is, or one of his conclusions, is when Jews left Germany and went to various parts of Europe, they were shunned by everyone, by the governments, and also by the Jewish communities. I mean, one point that you bring out, which one could look at, maybe it's too petty. How much money was really raised, by Polish Jewry vis-a-vis JDC?
A very good question. The number is about $400,000 raised by Polish Jewry to $1 million by JDC. So it is really, Polish Jewry is able to finance by donations and also by material donations the first 3 months of the refugee crisis, especially what becomes then really expensive, and this is also where JDC steps in, is the long-term perspectives, either emigration or economic integration. This both is really expensive regarding funds. Some of it is actually taken by, for example, the Hechelutz movement in Poland, but that is also back-financed by JDC. So it's not totally that this 1 million is all, it might be slightly more, but nonetheless, I think it shows this the solidarity campaign actually by Polish Jewry, but also by Jewry abroad, that it is underestimated how much was actually possible on the level of agency at that point.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I was wondering if you could comment a little bit about the beginning of this process. Was there cooperation between the Polish government and the German government in terms of these laws that they were passed? How much were they talking to each other? And what sort of, was there actual, were they just sort of mimicking each other, or were they actually communicating with each other? And then secondly, if you have time, if I remember correctly, I think it was the family of Greenspan who was the person who assassinated the German diplomat that created the pretext for Kristallnacht. His family was one of the deportees, correct? So if you could talk about that also, thank you.
Yeah. Maybe let me start with your second question, as this is one that I always try to leave a bit in the back, as the history of the Polnaktion and the deportations have been overshadowed for more than 70 years mostly, but what happens then from November 8th onwards towards German Jews with the so-called Kristallnacht, the Reichspogromnacht, or the November pogroms. So it is actually the case that the family of Herschel Greenspan, who at that time was living in Paris, lived in Hanover. His parents, his sister, and his brother were among those who were actually shipped with the help of the German Red Cross over to Poland, and they stayed in the town of Zbaszyn. The JDC in 1939, when it receives this letter that I showed you, complaining about the conditions in Zbaszyn, believes that it might be the brother or the father of Herr Greenspan who sent this letter. I see no veil here that this is the truth, but this is, of course, the Greenspans are extremely prominent also in Zbaszyn. As Herschel Greenspan receives a few days after the expulsion a postcard from his sister in which she is in very few words describing what happened and asks for help. This wouldn't have been necessary because he would have known through the news. For 10 days, the expulsion is headlines in European and US press. Everyone knows about it, and it's not only headlines in the Jewish press, it is headlines in the press at all. So one of the reasons given for the assassination attempt in the German embassy in Paris, in the defense that is set up for Greenspan, is that Greenspan wanted to raise attention towards the fate of those who've been deported. The whole thing with the Greenspan story is that it is quite shady at very many points of the research that has been invested into it. Nonetheless, I think this is one of the clues one can really draw from it, as there is this very close personal connection. Would you be so kind to remind me of your second question?
The cooperation between Poland and Germany.
Oh yes, thank you so much.
Because I believe that Poland expelled some ethnic German citizens, correct, at this time?
Yes, they did at the end to end this measure. So what we see already from 1925 onwards actually are retaliations in expulsion measures between Poland and Germany, which spin on from 33 onwards, and Germany actually from 1935 onwards has a list of potential deportees, all of them Polish Jews, in case someone with German citizenship who held agricultural property in Poland is expulsed from Poland. This turns then in 1938 to the conflict around the Jews with Polish citizenship, and there is a little bit of exchange between both governments. And within the Munich Agreement, during the Sudeten crisis, or ending the Sudeten crisis, Poland receives a part of the Czech Republic, the Olsa territory. This is just a week before the Polish Ministry of Interior then launches the March laws. So there has been, of course, the question that Jerzy Tomaszewski raised in his research about how misguided was the Polish government in setting up the law at this point. But there has been no exchange on expulsions to this point. What happens then on the 29th of October is that Poland starts to retaliate by deporting Jews with German citizenship from Poland, and this actually stops the deportation on the German side. And I said in the beginning that about 25,000 were arrested, about 5,000 arrived at the border, but at that point the borders were closed and they were sent back to their hometowns.
Thank you so much. Hi. So I have a list of questions, but I'll limit myself. So I was wondering if you could talk a little more, you've done amazing research, a little more about the identity, the sense of identity of these refugees. I mean, they were Polish Jews, at least nominally. Some of them had families. So if there was, aside from committees, aside from JDC money, how family networks were involved in assisting them, and the extent to which it played out in quote-unquote mixed families, meaning German Jews. I'm thinking of Holocaust film where Mr. Weiss is sent to Warsaw and then his wife stays behind. How much of that phenomenon played out in that story?
Thank you so much for your questions. Identity. In 1925, 150,000 Jews with Polish citizenship lived in Germany. This number dwindles till 1938 by more or less 2/3. Those who are living in 1938 in Germany, and this shows our research into more than 1,000 people, which is a large sample of this group, is economically well-to-do, very well-to-do, most of them living in the country for more than 3 decades. Just a very few coming up directly after the First World War, most of them coming through the normal route of, I would say, uptown immigration through first Vienna to Berlin until around 1910 to 1912. So they come within the Prussian Habsburgian time through the normal ways of the empire, from the countryside to the urban centers. And they do understand themselves mostly as German, but having Polish passports. A group which is not deported in 1938, but then attacked in 1939, are Jews that are stateless at this time, but until 1934 held the German citizenship, but had applied as Jews with Polish passports during the Weimar Republic era for the German passport, and had received it and were stripped of it until from 1935 or 4 onwards. So they are actually in a very trapped situation, because they can only emigrate on the stateless quota. They can't even emigrate on the Polish quota, which is really putting them in danger. And they are kind of out of sight, first of all. So those who are within the sample and who are still in the country in 1938 are people who are no longer understanding themselves as migrants. And this is not only the case for Berlin, but for all the other cities. Actually, a JDC representative describes that all the refugees in Zbaszyn behaved very well, and this is because they come from the big German cities. And then the big German cities are listed, and to them it is very clear these are German Jews. And also in the Polish reaction, Polish-Jewish reaction, it is Jewish refugees from Germany, Ausgewiesene von Deutschland. It is really those who've been expelled or sent off from Germany, which also makes the question of family networks a really fascinating one. It is in very few towns, actually in Tarnów and in Krakow, but this is so that a larger number of refugees is not depending on the committees. It is in those 2 cities, and otherwise it seems that family networks are not really helping that much. They come to play actually only when the camp in Zbaszyn is dissolved in August 1939, and people are on the very last straw. And then they find someone there, somehow related to somewhere, southeast, wherever, but it's really only at that time that this is used. So family networks is not really what's going on. My problem is I don't have a pen to note the questions.
Mixed marriages.
Mixed marriages, thanks. Mixed marriages is a topic that is covered by the Jewish writers and journalists immediately. And it is about the Arische Freund that the Yiddish press writes a lot, the Aryan wives. There is at least a group of 200 women who converted to Judaism during the 1920s and who received Polish citizenship by marriage to their Polish husbands. And they have been expelled as well. Some of them are able to return, some of them are under pressure by the Gestapo to get divorces. And In the case of Braunschweig, for example, where I had a close look at the files, there were 4 of them. 2 of them went to Poland with the deportees. One was able to get back with the 16-year-old son and was encouraged by the husband to get a divorce to save the son. The other one wanted the divorce on her account, but in most cases we see that those who've been converted or who converted and received Polish citizenship stay with their families and stay in Poland. In some cases, they are then actually in 42, 43, not forced to move into the ghettos. In some cases, they are. So again, some kind of very mixed tableau of persecution plays out then.
Very interesting. I'm curious to know, you mentioned the camp was dissolved in August of 38. Is that the people gradually, 39 rather, people gradually dissipated going back, or they went into Poland proper? From what you said, basically being expelled into Poland, how do they go back? If anyone went back, I know some did.
Yeah. So there is a joint Polish-German border post that is institutionalized in April 1939, through which the return is organized, the short-time return. And part of this short-time return is that if someone receives such a short-time return stamp, this person is immediately reported to the police office in the town he's going to and needs to register every day twice with the police until he leaves that town again. So it's an ongoing persecution, even in these few weeks that are allowed to stay there. Regarding the situation in Zbaszyn and the dissolvement of the camp, first of all, in June, July, a lot of people are finally able to either emigrate or to get into the interior of Poland. Some let themselves be smuggled out by locals through what is kind of a police cordon around Zbaszyn, but others have to wait there until Zbaszyn is finally dissolved in the last week of August. And with the the war becoming imminent, this is really a topic for the Jewish relief agencies, as they are very afraid that if there is a large group of Jews at the border that Germans know about, they will fall prey to the Germans at first. So that in the last weeks of August, actually, there's a huge effort to have those who are in Zbaszyn relocated into the interior of Poland and get them away from the front lines.
Well, thank you very much, Alina, for a fascinating lecture. That has shed light on an overlooked chapter of the Shoah, and thank you all for attending today. We have some material in the back about JDC archives that you are welcome to look at, and we also have sign-up sheet for our newsletter and for future programs. Thank you.